forward, follow me. If I hesitate, push me. If I am may kill me, avenge me. If I am a traitor, kill me.
Gangsters, cops, and politicians, get ready to rock. On a mission, each one of us shares our own vision. When I was on the yard, I went real hard. While I patrolled the streets, all the G's on me. When I was on the yard, I went real hard. While I patrolled the streets, all the G's on me.
Saludos, it's your host, Gabe Morales, returning with the sea names of the Nuestra Familia, as in Calo. Speaking of Calo, if you haven't seen it yet, check out my episode. I think most people found that to be pretty interesting, although there was a few disagreements on what certain terms meant. Never forget that a lot of things, whether they be in English or Spanish or Calo, depends on the context, which can change its meaning one way or another. But anyways, I hope you've been enjoying this series so far, as we're closing out the year 2023. Today, I'll start off with Raymond Castillo Llanes, known as Ray from San Ho. Believe it or not, his brother, Tuffy Castillo, was Mexican Mafia. Ray was associated with the NF in the mid-1970s, and I believe was housed at Soledad CTF in 1974, but had basically become a hermit by 1976. I show an Anthony Tonito Castro, who was out of San Ho, but I also believe had ties to Bakersfield. I show that he was NF in the mid-1970s, and I believe bombed some bikers. I'm not sure from which club, but I understand he attended a meeting in the late 1970s with Sammy Dominguez and David Hernandez, who I believe was also out of Bakers. As I understand, the business of the day was discussing whether or not to kill Chalo Hernandez, who was the founder of Nuestra Familia Mexicana, and understand that several NF traveled to Salinas in mid-October, and that they got a revolver and some ammo from Arturo Turi Lozoya, who was the captain in the Baba Sosa car, so in order that the NF could take out Chalo in Bakers at his home in October of 1977. Understand during that attempt that an individual named Wolfie Fierro was killed, and that Tonito was given life for that 187. Under D number 13631, I show Enrique, a.k.a. Kiki, a.k.a. Shotgun Castro, out of Stockton. I show that he was Nuestra Raza in the mid-1990s under K number 24187. I showed that he was housed at DVI in the year 2000 and was involved in the Avenal riot that I spoke of earlier in January 2002. I show he was finally released, but then popped in Calaveras County in late 2004, whereby I believe he was given V number 68354. And I believe he paroled in 2010, and I'm unsure what happened to him. I show Ernesto Ernie Castro out of Salas. He was an NF associate involved in the murder of Gloria Rice. When I get to the R's, I'll talk about her husband, Jack Rice, who was killed by the NF earlier in 1976. My understanding is Gloria had witnessed that murder and herself was killed on New Year's Eve, 1976, by Ernie Castro in the NF. There was Fidel Mousy Castro. I have down that he had ties to Los Baños, but also Bakers. I showed that he was popped in Operation Dictator in 2008, and I believe ran some NF-controlled stores and was laundering his money by dope. There was a Johnny Buzzard Castro out of Salas. He was NF in the mid-1970s under B number 46059. But check this out. I show he was only validated as an NSO associate in 2011 and was slammed down in El Pinche Hoyo in 2012 for that reason. Believe it or not, he is still around and presently housed at Valley State Prison in Chowchilla, being 73 years of age. There is Leopoldo Jr. Castro out of Salas. I show that he was NF in the mid-70s under B number 56925, and I show was released in April 1976 and was considered to be a hermit. However, he was validated by CDC as being NF in 1979 when they were barely working out the validation system. I'm not so sure about the accuracy of that information. However, I do show that he came back on a new number, a P number, 67335, and I believe was off parole by 2004. There was a Rene Blinkers Castro, who was NF in the early 70s. In fact, I show he had ties to West Covina back in 1969 and got his first CDC term under B number 42788. I show he paroled in 1977, but caught a 187 in 1980 and returned to custody on that B number. He was housed at CIM in 1981 and paroled in 1987. I believe then he got popped for a robbery charge in 91 and given H number 37851. And I'm not sure what happened to him, but if he was still alive, he would be 70 years old. There was Richard Rambo Castro of the Chino Sinners at a time when the Chino Sinners had quite a few NF members. He had B number 81941. I showed that he was housed at San Quentin in 1983 and had parole by 2010. There's Salvador Gangster Castro at Avisa. I show he did YA time in 1986, but had paroled in 87. He then caught a burg and robbery charge in 89 and was sentenced to CDC in 1990 under E number as an Edward 84802. I then showed he was released on that in the mid-90s, but caught several parole violations. He then was rehoused in CDC and spent time at Pelican Bay SHU, as well as Salinas Valley State Prison, where he was running a dope operation with ties to Mexico. My understanding is that he was part of the federal faction, even while housed in the state, and is presently housed at the ADX. There was Benjamin Santos Castro, also known as Reaper, from San Fran Mission. He did YA time in 1993, and then I show kind of assault with a deadly weapon in charge in 2004, whereby he was given V number 39316. He soon paroled, and I understand held the keys as the regimental commander in San Francisco in 2006. He then got popped for a parole violation in that year, and eventually the feds prosecuted him under BOP number 17161-097. And he is currently housed at the Mendota facility in Fresno County, California, so isn't too far from home. He is scheduled to be released in 2029. I show a Walter Angel, a.k.a. Gato, a.k.a. T-Rex Castro, had a San Ho, but also had ties to San Bernardino County. I show that he was an NF associate in the mid-70s under B number 46423. He then got out on that B number and came back under H number 89257, and I believe was out of custody by 2004. There was Jesse Bozo Castro Renteria. He was an NF member in the 1970s under B number 31838. He was housed at Folsom State Prison in 1971, then moved to Soledad that year. He was housed at San Quentin in 72, and then moved to DVI, whereby he was killed on July 3rd, 1972, by Aryan Brother member Barry Mills and MA member Cato Vargas. As I recall, that happened in the Chow Hall. I show a Freddie Ponzi Catano, who was an NF member in the 1970s under B number 56642. I show he was born in 1953 and I believe was housed in Avenal State Prison in 2012 and is currently housed at San Quentin State Prison, being 71 years of age. There was an Elias Sadboy Catano Renteria out of Morgan Hill. I show he was affiliated with the Northern Structure in the 1990s, but may have also been one of those guys affiliated with Texas Syndicate, as I show some indications he had Texas ties. He had D number 704421, and I believe was housed at DVI in 1999. He then got out and was given P numbers in Paul 15426, and I'm unsure of his current whereabouts. I show a Daniel Diablo Caudillo out of Corcoran. I show that he was NF in the mid-1970s with the B number, and then was paroled in October 1976, but came back with D number, as in David, 45370, and I believe was released on that number by 1996. There was a Johnny Boo Boo Caudillo out of San Juan. He was popped on a felon carrying a concealed weapon in 1991, but I show actually didn't do his first CDC time until he was popped on a marijuana charge in 1995 under J number 4072. I show that he was paroled on that, but caught a parole violation in 98. I believe was housed at DVI in 2001, paroled in 2003, but caught a drive-by shooting charge in 2003, whereby he was given a 16-year sentence. He then was housed at San Quentin in 2003, Soledad in 2012, but I show was currently not in custody. There was a Manuel Spooky Cavazos out of San Juan. I showed that he did YA time in 1978 and then was arrested and housed in the Santa Clara County Jail in 1984 and sent to the adult system under C number 91116. I showed that he was in and out in the years after that and wasn't validated as being Nuestra Raza until 1995. I show that he was housed at DVI in the year 2000 through 2003, and I believe was released by the year 2003. And I'm unsure what happened to him. There was Richard Cavazuela out of Sacra, but also had ties to Santa Cruz. I show he was an NF associate in the 1980s / Northern Structure and was a big dope dealer. And I had him at C facility during that time period. I told you that the Norteños had taken over the yard under C number 55044. I show that he was housed at Salinas Valley State Prison in 1997, where he caught assault by prisoner charge. Here's another one. Although I had pegged him as being at least Northern Structure, if not an NF associate, in the late 80s, he was not validated as such until 1999. He was housed at Pelican Bay in the year 2000 and at SADF in 2012, but I show is currently not in custody. There was a Carlos, a.k.a. Fat Carlos, a.k.a. Toots Ceja, who had a B number, 55486. I show this guy was NF in the 1970s and was involved in the killing of an individual named Robert Avina on January 18, 1975 at DVI, but I'm unsure what happened to him after that. There was a Joseph, a.k.a. Big Oso Serna, out of San Juan. I show he did YA time in the late 70s and then was sent to the adult system after he was convicted on a robbery charge in 1981 under C number 33084. I show that he was housed at San Quentin in the mid-80s and paroled in 1987. He then caught multiple parole violations and came back on assault with a deadly weapon charge in 1987 under K number 61530. I showed that he was released on that, but was popped on a dope charge and housed at the Santa Clara County Jail in the year 2003, and then was on community custody in 2005 in Sacramento when I lost track of him. Then we have Andrew Mad Dog Cervantes out of Stockton. Mad Dog is an NF legend of sorts. My understanding is he had also had ties to San Bernardino, the Chino area, in the late 70s, and caught C number 28800. He was housed at CIM in 1981 and San Quentin in 1983. He finally was paroled on that C number in 1985, whereby he took control of the streets of Stockton. He was housed at Folsom Prison in 1986, but paroled in 87. Here's another guy. Check this out. Was not validated NF until 1988, when by that time he had long been running the show in the Stockton area. He was returned to custody again in 1992 on a RICO case and sent to the feds on BOP number 05450-097. Mad Dog was considered to be by many in the BOP to be the number one NF guy before multiple NF hit the system after Operation Black Widow in the early 2000s. He was housed at multiple BOP facilities, including Atlanta in 2005 and at Coleman in 2010. Then was housed at Lewisburg 2012 to 2015 and was about to be released to the streets when he was popped on another major federal case and housed at the Santa Rita Jail in Alameda County. He then was returned to the feds and has been housed in Florence, Colorado for the last few years. There's a lot more I could say about Mad Dog Cervantes. I may have to come back and do a special episode on him also. There was David Luis Cervantes, known as DC, from the Chino Sinners. He was affiliated with the NF back in the late 1970s and was part of that raid I mentioned on Chalo Hernandez in Bakersfield in 1977. I believe there's actually two missions that were attempted 187s on Chalo, one in May of 1977 and one in October 77. I understand that DC was shot during the first attempt by members of Chalo's crew who were defending him. You have to understand at that time, Babo Sosa, who was arch rivals of Chalo, had the upper hand, but Chalo still had some loyalists, especially in the Bakersfield area where he was from. And here's another guy. DC was not validated until 1979 as being NF. He was housed at Pelican Bay for many years, where he was considered to be a captain, and I understand reported directly to Tibbs Morado. When the federal generals Tibbs, Corney, and Pinckney were moved to the Fed after Operation Black Widow, D.C. was considered to be one of the top 3 NF left at the Bay, and for a while it was believed he was the sole general, the first time that had happened since Babo Sosa. However, it was decided that D.C., Conejo Perez, and Chuco Guillen would share power under the new overall governing body ran by the state. This did not go over well by the guys in the feds, who felt there should only be one NF. And so there was a lot of feuding that went back and forth. After the end of hostilities agreement, which D.C. signed off on, along with Chuco and Conejo, D.C. was kicked out of Pelican Bay Shoe and was housed at Solano State Prison for a while, until he was indicted on one of the latest RICO cases against the NF, which I understand has resulted in them all being sent to the feds. And I said before, I don't get involved in current politics, but it's pretty much well known, no big secret. Many people are looking at what is going to happen between the state and the feds. Now, D.C. may catch some slack because he is very old, having been born in 1948, and is illiterate. And a lot of people believe he was manipulated by Conejo and Chuco. So we'll see if he gets a pass, if he lives that long. There's Henry Cervantes, who I knew as Manuel Cervantes, aka Happy from Lodi. That's me right there, my left hand, holding up his shirt to show his Nuestra Familia tattoo on his chest. Yes, he was up in Seattle at the time, but once again, people say there's no NF in Washington State. I had him at the King County Jail from March to August 1995. This is his jail cell, where he left his call sign, where he was returned on D number 97150. He ended up catching multiple parole violations in the late 1990s and was at some major NF meetings in 2001 that were part of Operation Black Widow. He then was housed at the Santa Rita facility and pled guilty in 2004 and was sent to the feds under BOP number 02824-748. He was housed at Lewisburg in 2009 and released to the Calles in April 2010. However, he was rearrested just over a year later for some homicide and arson charges, which was part of another RICO case, also involving Mad Dog Cervantes. He was very close to Spider Favela, and as you see, they both got new ink in the feds. Henry Happy Cervantes is currently housed at Florence ADX Max, where he is doing life. There was Jaime Hennessy Cervantes out of San Mateo, West Side, I believe. He was also involved in that case with Happy as well as Bird Lives, whereby some individuals were killed in the Bay Area. He was also indicted on that RICO case in 2013 under BOP number 06729-748. He's been housed for the last few years at USP McCreary and is not scheduled for release until at least the year 2040. There is Richard Cervantes. I believe many of these Cervantes are all related. I dealt with Rich de Sacra at C facility, whereby I believe he was a sleeper, under C number 3149, and was known as a major drug dealer out in the yard. There was Frank Chispas Chacon at El Hoyo Mara. He was one of the first West Familia members to join after his brother was killed by La M at San Quentin. Frank had A number 8666, but was pegged as a hermit by 1976. There was Martin Kung Fu Chacon. He was a big drug dealer who was killed by the NF in 2012 when he was shot in the back of the head. As you probably would expect, the gang life is no game. Many of the people involved in it play for keeps, especially when you're dealing with prison gangs like the NF. There was Roberto Vampiro Chaires out of Sacra. This is another guy that I remember very well because anybody I knew from Sacra, I would always try to find out about. Because, hey, I live there. I know some of them who are my neighbors. Vampiro was out of Barrio Centro in downtown Sacramento. He was considered to be a Northern Structure Cat 2 in the 1980s. Was housed at Folsom in 1985 under C number 36626. And then he was housed at Corcoran in 1991 and was in Corcoran Shoe in the year 2012, I believe under a new number, F as in Frank, 47646. But I believe has since been released. There was an Anthony Tony Chavez, I believe was related to Copos Gallegos and had ties to Visa. He was an NF associate in the 1980s under C number 20175. And I showed was involved in a hit in 1993 on the individual with the last name of Flores. There's Benjamin, a.k.a. Güero, a.k.a. Buick, a.k.a. Little Pogo Chavez. I show that he was a Northern Structure / NF associate in the 1980s with D number 69213. I show that he paroled in 2001 but ran into some problems with the Carnales. There was Jerry Bones, a.k.a. Little Huesos Chavez. I show that he was part of the Lencho Guzman car and was only validated as being an insole in 2002 under T number 37115. I show that he was housed at DVI in 2004 and I think might have been looked at being indicted by the feds in 2009, but it looks like was charged by the state and given A numbers in Alpha, G as in George, 8871. I show that he was housed at North Kern State Prison in 2012 and is currently housed at San Quentin State Prison. There is Louis Dump Truck Chavez out of San Juan. As I understand, he was sponsored into the NF at Tehachapi in 1989 by Chente Arroyo and Joseph Pinky Hernandez. He paroled in 1990 and was very active out in the streets. I understand he was involved in PCP cells, but was keeping a lot of money for the NF. I believe he attempted to drop out in 1991, but was kept on a GP yard in 93. I'm almost positive this is the same guy I had at C facility. He was pretty slick, where he sometimes worked as a voluntary yard worker, and I believe was hit that year. All I remember is everybody was scared of him, and he kept himself, and I would say very, very sophisticated. I show that he was housed at Pelican Bay State Prison in 1999, wherein he finally did drop out, when he finally was given DO status in 2010, and was out of custody by 2012. By that time, he had done a lot of damage to the NF. There's Peter, a.k.a. Pistol Pete Chavez out of Oakland. He was an NF in the mid-70s with B number 66108. Understand that he was subject of attempted 187 in 1976 by Antonio Rocha Guerrero and Daniel Vasquez, Black Bob's brother. I show that Pistol Pete was not validated as being NF until 1979, and I believe had dropped out by that time. There's Ralph Jerry, a.k.a. Black Jerry, a.k.a. Huesos Chavez out of San Juan. He was an NF member in the 1980s under C number 8888. Yes, 4 8s. Understand that at one time he was head of security, but ran into some trouble with the Carnales. He then got out, but was reincarcerated under J number 46220, and I think was out of custody by at least 2012. There was a Terry, a.k.a. Chente Charles, out of Stockton. This guy was a tall white guy. I remember at C facility when the NF and Northern Structure were running things. He had D number 46552, and I remember had a teardrop tattoo on his face, which usually stands for a homicide. I believe he may have been related to a Stacy Childs, a.k.a. Buzzard, who is rumored to be one of the founders of the Northwest Foundation for the NF. I show a Daniel, a.k.a. Danny Cobb, whose nephews were the Gabriel brothers, who were very involved in the NF at DVI. I show that Danny had a B number of 61718 and was involved in the NF in the 1970s and gave schooling to his nephews. I show a Richard Cobos out of San Juan, who had a B number of 8707 and was born in 1947. He was involved in the NF in the mid-1970s. I believe his older brother was Jose Cobos, a.k.a. Crow, who was married to Christina Tapis, a.k.a. Brown Eyes. Crow had a B number of 28337 and was heavily involved in the NF in the mid-70s, being a major dope dealer. Eventually, though, I think he got in too deep and ended up testifying on the case whereby the NF tried to take out Chalo Hernandez. But he was still named on the RICO case. And so, I'm going to have to stop right there. I hope you learned something new. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians. If I go forward, follow me. If I hesitate, push me. If I may kill me, avenge me. If I am a traitor, kill me.
Gangsters, cops, and politicians, get ready to rock. We're on a mission. Each one of us shares